So the question that I'm dealing with is, are we even talking about violence?
Well,
right on. So oftentimes I am asked, what is your position on violence? Are you all going to use violence? Are you all going to incite a riot and questions similar to that? Well, I never answer the questions because they are actually intellectually dishonest questions. Though it seems that people are asking me a principled question, asking me to take a principled position, or say my orientation as regards to violence, they're actually not doing that. What they're asking me isn't if I am against violence in general. They are asking me if I believe that black people can use violence to fight back against the violence inflicted upon them. The reason why I say that is a couple of reasons. So one, even evaluating how people understand the potential for violence. If there is a large group of white people who are gathered, nobody says, oh, this is going to be a mob, this is going to be a violent group of people, this is going to be some sort of social unrest or outburst. But if there are a group of black people who congregate, the question of violence springs up. So it's not about what people are actually doing, it's about who those people are and the reason for being there. So we've seen here very recently that there was a riot on State Street. There was a group of college kids who were drunk, probably, and very upset that their basketball team had lost. And they were lighting fires, they were saying, I'm sure, all types of obscenities, and doing all types of things. And there probably actually was a real threat or a real danger there on State Street. But that was not described as violent. If 2 or 3 black kids are hanging out on a corner, and they're just standing there, the police or the state says there's a potential for violence here, this group of people is violent, and they respond accordingly. So the question of violence isn't really even a question of violence. We haven't even, I say we got to deal with these principles or sort of deal with the landscape of the questions before we can actually answer the question of, is violence being used, and if so, does it make sense to do that, or does it make sense to not do that? So the same people who are asking me if YGB or Freedom Eagle or myself, if I am principally for or against violence, are not the same people who are asking the police if they are for or against violence. The people are not denouncing the troops. They are not denouncing the mayor who is in charge of the police. They are not denouncing the police chief, and they're not denouncing the state for violence. So we are honestly having a conversation about whether black people have the right to fight back. And that's the question I think we are all in some ways going to be addressing tonight, or at least that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time addressing. So in Detroit, a 9-year-old is asleep on a couch. The police bust into the house. They bust into the wrong apartment. They throw in like a little flash bomb. The bomb is so close to the child it nearly lights her blanket on fire. The police shoots a shot and kills the child, a black child. Her name is Ayanna Jones. Folks are upset. There's an unrest in the city. There's an outcry in the city. Folks get together, congregate, black folks, and they want to organize. The police respond, militarize themselves, and respond as if they are going to be fighting some other sort of military, some other sort of militia. The question here is, where was the violence in this situation? Is the violence the group of people who decided to resist, whatever that resistance means, or is the violence on the hands of the state and the police officer who murdered the child and the state's response to folks who wanted to organize or folks who are wanting to organize against the violence? And we, unfortunately, live in a time where people are still believing that black people don't have a right to organize. And moreover, black people don't have a right to self-defense. We've seen in our history, very recent history, here in Wisconsin, right, 100,000 people took over the Capitol, and that was considered heroic. That was considered an act of resistance. That was something that we pride ourselves on and model ourselves on. If a few of us black folks go to a city county meeting, we are met with several dozen officers and are told we are violent and disruptive and don't have the right to be there. I'm using all of these examples to illustrate the actual question isn't whether or not I am violent. The actual question isn't whether or not there is violence and movements that people are forcing onto us. The real question or the real issue is that people don't believe that black people have the right to resist. Anytime black people resist or are disruptive to the existing system, that is considered violent. Several times, dozens and hundreds of thousands of people have protested, have door knocked, have held up all types of signs about Scott Walker, have marched onto Scott Walker's house, have been very visible in Scott Walker's face or in Scott Walker's office. When a group of black people do that, because one of our members of our communities was gunned down, when we go and knock on the door, we are considered violent. When we went to door knock, we were told that that was violent, how dare we didn't have the right, that was too disruptive, and that was considered unsafe. And we were, something about threatening somebody's family or something they said, right? Something like that. Same situation, same use of tactics, same very similar reasons as to why we were resisting, and we were considered violent, and that tactic in general is not considered violent. So often the case is when folks organize, and when folks are resisting, we are told, and the state responds to us as not having the right to resist. But what we do know, what I can tell you is true from years of doing work in the gender justice movement, for years of doing work as an anti-violence advocate or anti-interpersonal violence advocate, is victims do resist. Victims do fight back. So I do believe that black people have the right to engage in a form of self-defense. I do believe that black folks have the right to resist systems that are causing violence onto them. So when I look at situations such as Ferguson, or when I look at situations such as Baltimore, if asked, do I agree with the methods used or do I agree with the tactics used, I do not want to see anybody killed. But what I am saying is I believe that people have the right to fight to make sure that nobody else is killed. And what I also believe is that property is not nearly as important as human life.
Come on now.
The windows will be replaced, but Freddie Gray will not be replaced. And the reason why it's also important for people to understand in the trajectory of self-defense is people's first response isn't necessarily to move to violence. People's first response, innately, I think, is to try to figure out how to troubleshoot something. But when so much violence has been inflicted upon a community, and there are no other options, meaning other options have been exhausted, or other options just don't work, or don't feel relevant to them, that people take up, I don't want to say take up arms, but people resist in other ways that are considered disruptive, or that people try to term as violent. And so it is my position that social movements, at some point, are meant to be disruptive. If the state is continuing to act violence against communities, the communities have the right to resist. If the state or the police are continuing to shoot down black people have the right to self-defense and to protect themselves. And so we as a community have to move from having these conversations sort of in a very blanket and, I don't want to say naive, but a racist sense of, oh my God, those people are violent. No, those people want to live. Yes. And that's how we should understand resistance, essentially. Yes.